Nero Wolfe and the Echo in the Elevator Shaft. A Nero Wolfe story. An elevator stops. Silence follows until something answers back. Welcome to Mystery Parlor. I am your host, Axen. Let me know in the comments, where are you tuning in from tonight? Hearing from you all brings this story to life. Let's dive in. When the buzzer rang at 10:12 that morning, I had just settled into the red leather chair in the office, cup of coffee in hand, and a vague plan to look productive until noon. Mr. Wolfe was upstairs in the plant rooms with Theodore, arguing over whether an Ecuadorian cattleya had bloomed too early. As far as I knew, orchids had schedules stricter than the Bureau of Internal Revenue. The front door wasn't supposed to buzz before 11. That was house rule number 7, right behind no loud ties and no discussion of weight in the presence of the master. So when Fritz poked his head in and told me we had a visitor, I knew this wouldn't be a normal Tuesday. Name? I asked, rising. Fritz wrinkled his nose. She wouldn't give one. Said it wouldn't mean anything yet. That sounded like a riddle or a trap. Either way, I was intrigued. I walked down the hall, and there she was, blonde, composed, dressed in a navy coat that probably cost more than my last 3 suits. Her eyes scanned the foyer, like it might reveal a hidden passage. "Miss," I said, "I don't want to be rude, but surprises don't go over great in this house. Especially before lunch." She turned and gave me a smile like I'd just asked her for the time instead of questioning her existence. "You're Archie Goodwin. Guilty. And you're the woman who didn't give her name, because it doesn't matter yet. But I need Nero Wolfe to hear something." "Here." She nodded. "Something strange. Something that's been happening in the elevator shaft of my building." I'll admit, I was hooked. Not by her, though she'd have made the cover of a glossy in the right lighting. No, it was the word elevator shaft. That's not a phrase people toss around unless something's gone wrong, or is about to. "Well, you've earned a few minutes," I said, motioning her in. "But just a warning, he hates machinery, motion, and metaphors. So if this turns into all 3, we're going to need a bribe. Possibly pastry." She gave a tight smile and walked in like she owned a share of the joint. I let her pass and followed her back to the office, where I seated her in the red chair across from Wolves and buzzed for him. 10 minutes later, after grumbling about humidity and sabotage, the latter being directed at the orchids, I hoped, Wolfe lumbered in, settled into his chair, adjusted his yellow silk robe with enough ceremony to make the Pope blush, and gave her the look he reserves for people who don't smell like time or ink. "Miss," he said. "Your name?" She tilted her chin. "Claire Latham." He nodded as if filing it away in a cabinet labeled possibly tolerable. "I believe you wish to be heard," he said. "I live at 9917 West 8 9th. A pre-war building with an old manual elevator and a night operator named Simon. For the last 3 nights, around 2 a.m., I've heard something in the shaft. Not from the elevator itself. From inside the shaft. A voice, whispering." Wolfe sighed. "Whispers are imprecise. Dreams even more so." "I wasn't dreaming," she said. "And I wasn't the only one. Indeed, my upstairs neighbor, a woman named Trina Velicott, heard it, too. Last night she knocked on my door. White as a bone, said she heard someone calling her name down the shaft. 5 minutes later, she tried to climb out her 7th-story window. That earned Wolfe's full attention. He sat forward. Not a lot, just enough to signal he'd pushed the orchids out of his mind. "Did she succeed?" he asked. "She survived. Someone in the building saw her and called for help. She's in Bellevue now." I whistled low. "That's not a coincidence. That's either a shared psychosis or a damn good impersonation artist living in your walls." She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a tiny tape recorder, one of those silver digital ones you can pick up at a pawn shop for $40, and placed it on Wolfe's desk. "I recorded what I heard last night." Wolfe stared at it like it had just insulted his liver pate. "You recorded an echo," he said. "I recorded a voice." I looked at Wolfe. He was silent for a beat. Then he spoke, as casually as if asking Fritz for mustard. Archie, collect your coat. You'll accompany Miss Latham to her residence. I am interested in hearing this echo for myself. I blinked. You're coming. Wolfe raised a brow. No, of course not, but you will listen and report. If there is an echo worth my time, I shall consider corrective measures. Miss Latham smiled faintly. Mr. Wolfe, I assure you it's more than an echo. Wolfe closed his eyes. We shall see. For your sake, Miss Latham, let us hope it is. When Claire Latham and I stepped out of the cab on West 89th, I got my first look at the building she called home. It was one of those 6-story red brick numbers from the late 20s pre-war, like she said, with wrought iron over the windows and a stiff-backed kind of dignity, the kind that said, we've had doormen since Prohibition, and we don't gossip in the elevator, thank you. The awning over the front door was trimmed in green, and the name The Marwick was etched in the frosted glass like it had been done by someone with a fondness for Victorian funeral fonts. A narrow hallway led us into the lobby, quiet and clean, and smelled faintly of lemon polish and dustless corners. Claire led the way, her heels clicking on the marble tile with the kind of confidence that said she hadn't always had to make appointments to be heard. The elevator stood off to the right. It was a polished brass cage of the old kind, operated with a lever by a man in a dark green uniform who looked like he'd been embalmed around 1984 and reanimated for the night shift. This is Simon, Claire said, giving me a glance. He works nights, but I asked him to come down for a moment. Simon nodded to me. He was thin, pale, and smelled faintly of menthol and motor oil. His hair was gray, parted with a ruler, and his eyes had the mild, long-suffering patience of a man who'd seen enough people pretend not to hear him for one lifetime. Miss Latham, he said. This is the gentleman. That's right, she said. Tell him what you heard. Simon hesitated, looked at me, then down at the lever he held like a crucifix. It was around 2:30 in the morning, 3 nights ago. I was doing my usual last run. Nobody else in the car. I was coming up from the basement. When I passed the 4th floor, I heard something, a voice, like someone whispering real close. Couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like, well, not like an echo, not mechanical, like someone was there. Did you stop the elevator? He shook his head slowly. Didn't want to get stuck between floors, but I looked, shone a flashlight. Nobody, shaft was empty. I thought maybe it was one of the tenants playing games, but then it happened again. And then again. I turned to Claire. The woman upstairs, Trina, she heard it too. She nodded. She was above me. She told me she thought it was someone in the building, calling her name. That's what frightened her. She said it sounded familiar. Has she had any mental strain? Medication, history. She teaches painting to 4th graders and volunteers at a food pantry. She's not the kind to invent drama. I didn't say anything, but I filed that under not a diagnosis. Still, the Bellevue angle had teeth. People don't jump out of 7th-story windows for a lark. Claire led me into the elevator. Simon didn't speak, just adjusted the lever, and we began the slow rise through the floors. The cage rattled softly, the kind of sound you stop noticing when you've lived with it long enough. As we passed the 3rd floor, then the 4th, I strained my ears, nothing but the mechanical groan of cables. Claire spoke again. I live on 5. Trina lives on 6. She climbed out onto her fire escape and was halfway over the railing when someone screamed from a window below. You think someone was deliberately trying to spook her? I don't know, but I know what I heard. I stayed up, I waited, and I recorded it. The door opened onto 5, and Claire led me to her apartment, number 5B. It was tasteful, underfurnished in a deliberate way, with the kind of neatness that signaled control more than comfort. She handed me the digital recorder again. Play it, she said. I hit play. There was a moment of static. Then, through the faint hiss, I heard it. It was a voice barely, low, wavering, and twisted by acoustics. Not a clear whisper, but more like a word being dragged down a hallway. I couldn't make it out, but it had shape. It wasn't mechanical, and it wasn't random. Where were you standing when you recorded it? I asked. She pointed to the back room, near the service stairwell. There's a small vent where you can hear the shaft if it's quiet enough. That's where it comes from. I walked over. The vent was one of those old metal grates, painted over too many times. I crouched, pressed my ear to it. Nothing. But I'd stake Wolfe's orchid budget that in the dead of night with the building asleep it'd carry sound just fine. I straightened. Anyone new in the building recently? Someone who moved in just before this started? She thought yes. A man on the 3rd floor. His name's Dalton Cram. Works in finance. He's been odd. Keeps to himself. But I've heard him arguing on the phone through the walls. Late at night. Anyone else hear the voices? I asked around. One other tenant, Mr. Lipsey, 2nd floor, said he heard something, but he chalked it up to the elevator cables. Mind if I pay him a visit? Be my guest. He's usually home in the afternoons. I made a mental note. Then I pulled out my notebook. Let's go over the tenants, one by one. She hesitated, but nodded. All right. Trina Vellicott, 6th floor, painter, like I said. Lipsey, 2nd. Retired librarian. Then there's Mrs. Gannett on one, practically deaf, but she watches everything. And Dalton Cram, 3rd floor. There are others, but those are the ones I've talked to. I jotted it down. A neat circle was forming, the kind Wolfe liked, closed with edges. I stood. I'll have a word with Mr. Lipsey, and maybe take a walk past Cram's door. Meanwhile, if you hear anything again, you call me first. Not Wolfe. He doesn't like surprises, recordings, or stares. She smiled, faintly. I'll remember. By the time I left the building, I had more questions than answers. I didn't believe in ghosts, echoes at whispered names, or haunted elevator shafts. But I did believe in people with motives, and in tricks designed to push fragile minds toward edges they wouldn't otherwise approach. Someone wanted Trina Vellicott scared, or silenced. The question was why. Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe halfway through a plate of braised duck and celery root mash, which meant interrupting him would earn me a glare and possibly a threat to dock my salary. I waited until he dabbed his lips, then gave him the rundown. He listened, eyes closed, index finger resting against his cheek. A whisper in a shaft, he murmured. Fascinating. It's a setup, I said. Not a haunting. Somebody's getting inside people's heads. Indeed. He opened his eyes. And you suspect, Mr. Cram? I suspect anyone with a private phone argument and a suspicious move-in date. But I don't like how fast Miss Vellicott unraveled. She heard something meant for her ears. It wasn't general. It was targeted. He nodded once. Then the intention was psychological, subtle, cruel. Exactly. This wasn't a prank. It was precision work. Return tomorrow, Wolfe said. Speak to Mr. Lipsey. Observe Mr. Cram. Ask yourself this: who profits by Miss Vellicott's removal, and how could such a voice be projected without detection? I frowned. You think it's a machine? He gave me a look that could have burned toast. I think nothing yet. I observe. I rose. Fine. I'll observe. But if the elevator starts talking to me, I'm quitting. Wolfe reached for his glass. Nonsense. You're far too curious to quit. He was right. I was curious. And whatever was whispering in that shaft, it wasn't finished. I could feel it humming in the walls already, an echo waiting for someone to lean just a little too close. The next morning, I was back at the Marwick by 10-hour shop. Claire Latham hadn't called during the night, which meant either the whispering had taken the night off, or she'd finally gotten a few hours of sleep without leaning out the window to chase ghosts. Either way, I wasn't planning to let the trail go cold while Wolfe sipped Montenegro and read Pliny. I started on the 2nd floor. Apartment 2A belonged to one Mr. Thomas Lipsey, former librarian and full-time watcher of the building's internal weather, the type who knew who used the laundry room at 3 a.m. and who didn't tip the paperboy at Christmas. He opened the door in a plaid robe, a pair of horn-rimmed glasses perched halfway down his nose, a faint cloud of tea and pipe smoke curled around his head, like a halo made by Sherlock Holmes. Yes, Archie Goodwin, I said, showing the license Wolfe insisted I keep on me, but never renew myself. I'm looking into the recent oddities in the building. Miss Latham said you might have heard something. He gave me a thin-lipped smile, equal parts amusement and skepticism. I did. Not that it means anything. Let's pretend it does. He motioned me in with a sigh that suggested he had much better things to do, like finish a crossword or alphabetize regrets. The apartment was tidy to a fault. Not a book out of place. The only sign of life was a tea mug shaped like a cat, holding a violin, which I chose not to comment on. He sat down in a wingback chair that had probably outlived 2 wars and gestured toward the sofa. It was Tuesday, around midnight. I'd just turned off the radio. WQXR. Nothing scandalous, and I heard something faint. I thought at first it was the plumbing. This place is older than it pretends to be. What did it sound like? Whispering. Low. And it didn't echo like sound from the walls. It had direction. Intent. Could you make out the words? No. But I'll tell you what I could tell. It wasn't random. It paused as if waiting for a response, then resumed. Almost conversational. Where did it come from? He tapped his temple. That's the thing. My rational mind says it came through the elevator shaft. But it felt closer. Like it was in the wall. Do you think someone's doing it on purpose? I think, he said carefully, that someone here doesn't mind pushing the fragile toward the edge. And Miss Vellicott, despite her charm and colorful wardrobe, has always struck me as a touch brittle. Any idea who might have had a reason to see her rattled? He gave me a measured look. Ask Mr. Cram on 3. Or better yet, look at what she was painting. I blinked. Painting. She'd been working on a series, Urban Paranoia, she called it. Shadows in alleyways, figures in reflections, that sort of thing. She showed me one. There was a man in the elevator mirror, but she swore he wasn't there when she painted it. That's either inspiration or a warning sign. Or both, Lipsy said, sipping his tea. But it frightened her. She was certain she'd painted something that hadn't yet happened. I left him feeding his cat violinist another lump of sugar and took the stairs up to the 3rd floor, apartment 3B, Dalton Cram. I knocked. The door opened a crack. A single gray eye appeared. Yeah? Archie Goodwin. I'm looking into an incident involving Miss Vellicott. Pause. Then the chain slid, and the door opened wider. Dalton Cram was younger than I expected. Late 30s, maybe. Sharp suit, slightly askew. The kind of hair that took work to make look effortless. The kind of face that had been slapped before for profit or principle. I already talked to the cops, he said. You didn't talk to me. He gave a dry snort and stepped back. Fine. 5 minutes. His place was slick, glass, leather, and nothing personal. The kind of apartment that suggested either fast money or someone who hated furniture with opinions. I work late, he said, heading to the fridge. Didn't hear anything. Didn't see her. Barely knew her. Funny, I said, because I hear your walls are thin and your phone arguments louder than the stereo. He looked over his shoulder, expression tightening. I don't see how that's relevant. When someone almost walks off a ledge because a voice in the elevator shaft called their name, everything becomes relevant. He grabbed a bottle of water, twisted it open without drinking. Look, I didn't like her, if that's what you're digging for. She was nosy, asked questions. Once accused me of spying on her because I came home late. Was that all? She said she heard someone outside her door. Breathing. And was it you? I laughed. No, and if it was, I would have held my breath. I let the silence stretch until he started to fidget. That's when I spotted it on the bookshelf, nestled between a copy of Financial Derivatives Made Friendly and The Art of Psychological Persuasion. A small, wireless speaker, black and discreet. New toy? He frowned, followed my gaze. Oh, that. Yeah, Bluetooth speaker. I use it to play sleep sounds. Sleep sounds like what whispers? He narrowed his eyes. No. Rain. Ocean waves. Get to the point. I stood. The point is this. Someone here wants people to think they're hearing things. And you've got a speaker small enough to tuck in a vent. If it turns out you've been playing Ghost in the Machine, you'll be looking at charges that don't wash away with tide sounds. He stepped forward, tense. You don't have anything on me. Not yet. I smiled. But give it time. I left before he could decide whether or not to say something stupid. As I stepped out onto the landing, a voice from above called softly, "Mr. Goodwin." I turned. Mrs. Gannett, first-floor stalwart, was leaning over the railing from the second floor. She was old-school Greenwich Village beaded shawl, pinned up silver hair, and an air of vague theatrical concern. "Come down a moment, won't you?" She met me at her doorway, pulled me into her apartment with surprising strength for someone whose frame was mostly jewelry. Her living room was a shrine to the past. Photos, trinkets, and the smell of something slow-cooked, long enough to give it memories. "I didn't say anything yesterday," she said, lowering her voice, "because I thought it wasn't my place. But I saw something." "Tell me." 3 nights ago. Just after 1. I couldn't sleep. I was making tea. I heard a noise in the hallway. When I peeked out, I saw someone slipping through the service door. The one near the shaft. "Which floor?" "This one. First." But they were going down. "Who was it?" "Who was it?" I couldn't see their face. They wore a hoodie, but they moved like someone who knew the building. No hesitation. And the timing. She nodded solemnly. "That was the night poor Trina nearly fell." When I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was in the office, a pile of shredded correspondence in front of him. He didn't look up as I entered. "Report," he said. I gave him everything. Lipsy's theory about the paintings, Cram's evasive sniping, and Mrs. Gannett's mystery figure by the service stairs. Wolfe's steepled his fingers. A voice heard by several, a woman driven to panic. A man with a device capable of projection, but no clear game, unless someone wants Trina out of the building. Or silenced, Wolfe murmured. "What do you know of her artwork?" "She painted things that hadn't happened yet. Or thought she did." "Bring me one," Wolfe said. "Have Claire Latham secure it. I want to see what Miss Vellicott thought she saw." "We are being told something, but not in words." I nodded. "And what if it doesn't show anything?" He closed his eyes. "Then we have only the echo. And echoes, Archie, are the residue of things too quiet to shout." He reached for his beer. "I left to call Claire. The echo wasn't done. And somewhere in that shaft, the truth was still whispering. Claire Latham didn't need much convincing. When I phoned her that afternoon and asked if she could get one of Trina Vellicott's paintings, there was a pause on the line, the kind you could drive a truck full of doubts through. And then she said, "There's one she gave me last month. It's strange. I wasn't sure what to do with it." "Perfect," I said. "Wrap it up like it's a peace offering." Wolfe's got a taste for the symbolic. An hour later, she was at the brownstone's front door, slim cardboard bundle under one arm, and a look on her face that said she'd been rehearsing the handoff in her head. I took the painting, thanked her, and led her to the front room to wait while Wolfe finished berating Fritz about the cut of the duck fat. Eventually, the air cleared, the door creaked open, and Wolfe, robe loose and irritation intact, entered the office and nodded once. Claire followed me in, her steps quiet on the carpet. She placed the bundle on Wolfe's desk with care, like it might go off. "She gave this to me 3 weeks ago," she said. "Said it came from a dream, or maybe a memory." Wolfe gestured. I unwrapped it. It was oil on canvas. Smaller than I expected, about the size of a desk blotter. But it hit hard. A hallway, dim and oppressive, flanked by closed apartment doors. In the center, an elevator cage, mouth open, descending into shadow, and in the mirror of that elevator, which Trina had rendered with eerie clarity, was a reflection, a man's silhouette, just off frame. No face, just the hint of a shoulder, a watch, and a raised hand. not waving, reaching. Wolfe leaned forward. His eyes narrowed. "It is an imagined moment," he murmured. "Or perhaps a captured one." Claire sat on the edge of the red chair. Trina was obsessed with the idea that our building held memories in its bones. Echoes. She said some things were too quiet to be heard, except when the building wanted them to be. Wolfe gave me a glance. "There's your echo, Archie." I nodded. She was convinced this meant something. Maybe someone was trying to tell her something and she thought it was through the art. Or, Wolfe said, someone knew she'd interpret it that way and manipulated her accordingly. Claire shifted. "Do you think someone made her paint that?" "No. But it is possible someone responded to her belief, amplified it, made it dangerous." Wolfe turned his eyes back to the canvas. "This man in the mirror. Note the watch. Right wrist." I looked again. Sure enough. Most men wear their watch on the left. But this one, either a lefty or someone posing. "A detail chosen with intent," Wolfe said, "consciously or otherwise." "I could ask around," I said. "See if any of the tenants wear a watch that way." "Begin with Mr. Cram," Wolfe said, "and speak to Miss Vellicott's doctor, the therapist if she has one. Determine if she has experienced episodes of delusion before." "Miss Latham." Claire sat up straighter. "You have been helpful. But it would be irresponsible not to ask, are you certain this voice, this echo, was not imagined?" Her mouth opened, then closed. She took a breath. "I thought I was. But now, I'm not sure. I want it to be real, because otherwise I'm not any more sane than she is." Wolfe inclined his head. "Uncertainty is not madness, but it is dangerous. You will not enter the service stairwell alone again. Understood?" "Yes, thank you. That is all." She left without another word. I gave her points for restraint. Most people expect Wolfe to say something reassuring or wise at the end. He never does. I left 20 minutes later and headed straight for the Morwick. I started with Cram. He answered the door with a towel around his neck and a half-empty protein shake in hand. "Back again," he said. "What now?" I pointed. "Other wrist." He looked down. The watch was gone, but the tan line told the story. "Right wrist. Bing. You always wear it there." "Yeah. Left wrist makes my hand feel heavy." I nodded. "Weird, but good to know." He narrowed his eyes. "You're not with the police?" "No," I said. "I'm the guy who comes before them." He didn't like that, but he didn't argue either. I didn't stay. I didn't need to. That little detail, tiny, maybe subconscious, had landed him squarely in Wolfe's viewfinder. But motive was still missing. I went next to 6A, where Trina had lived. Her place was locked up, but the super's a bow-legged guy named Rafe, with a Yankees cap and a cough like gravel, let me in under the pretense of checking for loose wiring. I paid him $20 and promised not to touch anything with fingerprints. Trina's apartment was chaos under control, paint stacked by color. Canvases leaned against the walls, but the center table caught my eye. A notebook, open to a half-written page. I keep seeing the figure, not in dreams now, but near the mirror. A watch, a ring, right wrist, left-handed. I snapped a photo of it, then flipped back a few pages. Notes, sketches, paranoia on paper. But one detail stuck out. She'd written a name, Dalton. I went cold. Wolfe wouldn't call that proof. But it was more than theory now. She'd suspected him. I thanked the super, tipped him another 10, and left. Instead of heading back to the brownstone, I detoured to Bellevue. It took some wrangling, a lot of eye-rolling from the nurses, and one forged business card claiming I was her attorney. Eventually, I got 5 minutes with Trina in the garden. She looked thinner than her photos, and her eyes had the glassy sheen of someone not quite back from wherever they'd gone. But when I introduced myself, something flickered behind them. "You're Wolfe's man," she said. "I remember reading about you." "That's me. I'm trying to figure out what happened." She looked down at her hands. "Someone whispered my name. It wasn't a voice. It was a reminder. Of what? That I wasn't safe in my own mind anymore. I gave her a moment. Do you know Dalton Cram? She flinched, just barely. He's in 3B. Said you accused him of watching you. I did. He was. He'd be outside my door when I came home. Not every night, but enough. And once. She hesitated. Once I heard his voice in the stairwell. Except he wasn't on the stairs. He was somewhere else. It didn't echo. It vibrated. You think he was using something? I think he knew what I feared, and he used it. I stood. Thank you. You've helped more than you know. That night I returned to the brownstone and gave Wolfe the full account. He didn't speak for a long time, just stared at the painting. Finally he said, arrange a gathering. Tomorrow night, here. Everyone. Yes, Cram, Latham, Lipsey. Anyone who spoke to Trina recently. I will require them all. Even the echo deserves an audience. I leaned back. You've figured it out. No, Archie, I've seen it. That is always enough. Outside, the city hummed. Inside, something in the painting watched us. The next morning, after Fritz's scrambled eggs and Wolfe's customary refusal to acknowledge them with praise, I began making the calls. Claire Latham was first cordial, concerned, and immediately agreeable. Lipsey needed more coaxing, but when I mentioned Wolfe was hosting a discussion, his curiosity kicked in like a librarian hearing someone misquote Shakespeare. Dalton Cram, however, was another story. You want me to come to his house? He said, voice tight over the line. That's right, I said. You'll be in good company. Everyone who's heard the ghost in the shafts getting together, consider it a séance, with better chairs. I don't see the point. Then come to see what he sees. Wolfe doesn't waste time. And if you don't show, he'll take that as a kind of confession. There was a long pause. Then fine. 8 o'clock. But I'm not staying long. You might want to. By 6, I'd confirmed the final guest. Mrs. Gannett, who asked if she should wear black and bring brandy. I said no to both, but appreciated the spirit. Wolfe was already in his office, seated like a sculpture carved from contempt, listening to Bach and brooding over a small diagram he wouldn't let me see. He didn't look up when I entered. Everyone's in, I said. Even he nodded. Fritz will arrange chairs. Make certain they are evenly spaced. I don't want anyone crowding anyone else. This must be psychological and geometrical. You planning to trap the truth with symmetry. I intend to let it confess under pressure. I gave him the look I reserve for when he sounds like a philosopher cornered at a dinner party. You want to give me a hint? No. He opened his eyes. You will observe. That was Wolfe speak for stay quiet, and let me do the thinking. I could manage that, until about 8:03 p.m., when Cram tried to stand up before the second sentence. By the time the guests arrived, the office had been arranged like a parlor for a highbrow chess match. Wolfe in his chair behind the desk, me to his left, with a notebook I wasn't planning to use, and 5 guests seated in a semicircle like members of a jury who didn't yet know they were being judged. Claire Latham was composed, polite, and dressed in dark green. Lipsey looked fascinated, scanning the room like it might provide cross-references. Mrs. Gannett was bright-eyed and smelling faintly of something with cloves, and Cram wore a suit one shade too sharp for casual and one expression too calm for innocent. Wolfe took his time. He didn't speak until Fritz had served water and left the room with the silence of a trained conspirator. Then Wolfe said, Miss Vellicott remains under psychiatric care. Her recovery will take time. Fortunately, she has begun to remember. Cram shifted in his seat. Wolfe continued, his voice level and bored, his version of a loaded gun. She remembers, for instance, that someone once asked her, casually, if she'd ever painted something before it happened. A strange question. She also remembers a voice in the elevator shaft that said her name, and a night when she dreamed of falling. Claire frowned. Lipsey looked sharply at Cram. Cram remained still. Wolfe turned to me. Archie, the notebook. I stood and passed him a printed photo of Trina's journal page. the one with the note about the figure in the elevator mirror. He laid it flat on the desk. She also wrote this, Wolfe said. A detail that matters. A watch on the right wrist. Cram snorted softly. That proves nothing. No. Alone, it does not. Wolfe leaned back, but in context it reveals design. He swiveled slightly, his eyes meeting each guest in turn. This is not a ghost story, he said. It is a performance. Someone has spent weeks manipulating a sensitive woman. Not to frighten her randomly, but to dislodge her from reality just enough to remove her from this building without raising criminal suspicion. Why? Because she saw something, or painted something, or simply lived too close to the truth. Wolfe gestured toward the painting still sitting beside him. This canvas, he said, contains a reflection, a figure barely visible. And that reflection, like any reflection, has a source. Miss Vellicott believed she painted it from intuition. But what if it was memory? What if, one night, she saw someone where they shouldn't have been, and painted it before she realized what it meant? Lipsy cleared his throat. Are you saying she painted her stalker? Yes. And he saw the painting. He recognized himself. He knew she'd noticed. And he decided to make her doubt her senses by giving shape to her fears. Wolfe shifted again. Miss Latham, you heard a whisper in the shaft, but only after Trina began to unravel, and the recording you brought me, it was real. A voice projected through the building's shaft from a small device, one that could be placed temporarily inside a vent. He looked directly at Cram. I believe you own such a device. Cram's jaw twitched. You don't have any proof. No. But I have pattern, motive, and pressure. You moved into the Morrick 6 months ago. You and Miss Vellicott argued. She accused you of watching her. You knew she was perceptive, artistic, emotionally reactive. You began a campaign, small things, footsteps. A whisper, an argument overheard from no one. You wanted her out. Cram stood. This is ridiculous. You think I staged a haunting? Yes. Wolfe didn't blink. Because I believe you were in her apartment once. Late, uninvited. She didn't report it. But she remembered your voice and your watch. I never. You used a Bluetooth speaker. Wolfe cut in. And your knowledge of the building's acoustics. Perhaps you work in finance, but your hobby, Mr. Cram, is control. You enjoy being unseen and influential. When Miss Vellicott began to paint something real, you realized your anonymity was ending. Lipsy stood slowly. I knew I didn't like him. Mrs. Gannett clucked her tongue. He always used the service door. That's a sign. Claire was quiet, but I saw the fury in her eyes. Cram said nothing, just stood, jaw set, arms tight. Then Wolfe spoke again, quiet now. She will testify, he said. She is remembering. And that painting is more than intuition. It is evidence. Not admissible in court perhaps, but in this room it is damning. I suggest, Mr. Cram, that you seek legal counsel and psychiatric evaluation. Cram turned, walked to the door, paused. You think you're clever, he said. Wolfe's tone was glacial. No, I am thorough. Mr. Goodwin will see you out. I followed Cram to the hall. He didn't speak, just pulled his collar tighter like he was already feeling the cold wind of consequences. Back in the office, Wolfe had closed his eyes. You will call Inspector Kramer, he said. Explain delicately. He may not arrest, but he will watch. And that will be enough. I nodded. Claire stepped closer. You believe Trina will recover? Yes, Wolfe said, because she was right. Later that night, after everyone had gone, Wolfe returned to the painting. He studied it again, then poured a beer and said almost to himself, there is no cruelty more refined than gaslighting the imaginative. It is murder by erosion. He sipped. But sometimes even an echo can point to the truth. I looked at the elevator in the painting, and I swore. For a second, it looked like it was still descending. The next morning, Wolfe didn't emerge until almost 11. Fritz had long since cleared the breakfast dishes. and I had finished organizing the evening's guest list notes into a stack that looked official, but included at least 3 doodles of Dalton Cram, with little horns. Wolfe came down with the slow, deliberate gravity of a man who believed stairs were the last failing of civilization. He entered the office and settled into his chair with a grunt that meant either digestion or distaste for humanity in general. "You've spoken to Kramer?" he asked. "Left a message. He's curious, suspicious, and convinced you're accusing the wrong man." "I am not accusing," Wolfe said. "I am unveiling." He closed his eyes and steepled his fingers. "Cram is not finished." "Not yet." I tilted my head. "You think he'll retaliate?" "No. He will attempt to recover his position. He believes himself smarter than his adversaries, which is dangerous. He will make another move. We must be ready." "Define ready," I said, flipping open my notebook. "Booby traps? Fritz with a net?" Wolfe ignored me. "You will return to the Marwick. Speak again to Mrs. Gannett. Inquire if anyone entered the basement in the last 24 hours, and find the superintendent. Rafe, is it? Ask if he has seen anything removed from the service storage. Remove a speaker, perhaps, or a length of cable. Mr. Cram would not have retrieved his tools last night, but he might today before we draw legal scrutiny." That made sense, I had to admit. If Cram was the kind of man who staged psychological sabotage with Bluetooth speakers and whispered paranoia, he wouldn't leave his props behind. "Fine," I said, getting up. "But if I find a secret passage, I'm charging extra." I left the brownstone and headed back uptown. The Marwick was quiet when I arrived. Weekday quiet, with most of its tenants either off at work running errands or quietly recovering from last night's truth bomb in Wolfe's office. Mrs. Gannett met me at the door in a patterned housecoat that looked like a map of a forgotten country. She had a cup of tea in one hand and a curious glint in her eye. "Oh, Mr. Goodwin," she said before I could speak. "You've missed the excitement." "Excitement?" She nodded solemnly. "The superintendent, Rafe, said the basement door was unlocked this morning, and something was gone." "Gone?" "Yes. A tool bag. Heavy," he said. "Was there yesterday afternoon. This morning." "Pooh." I leaned in. "Did he say what was inside?" "He thought it was electrical gear. Cords, wires. But it wasn't labeled." "Of course not. Cram wasn't going to tag his sabotage kit with property of the manipulative creep in 3B. I asked her to hold that thought and track down Rafe in the boiler room. He was eating a sandwich the size of a hardback novel and looked irritated to have it interrupt. "Yeah, I saw the bag," he said around a mouthful. "Was behind the shelf near the furnace. Old canvas thing. Looked like it had some weight. Figured it was Lipsy's. He fiddles with his radio setup sometime." "And this morning?" "Gone." I nodded. "And the door?" "Unlocked. Not forced. Just opened. Just opened." "Do you remember when you last saw it?" He scratched his beard. "Late yesterday afternoon. Around 4. That fit. Cram had left the brownstone around 9:30 last night. He'd had time to cool off, rethink and return under cover of darkness, or just early enough this morning to avoid the building's more inquisitive eyes. I checked the service stairwell, the basement, the trash chute. Nothing. No speaker, no wires, no trace. If Cram had cleaned up, he'd done it well. I returned to the first floor, knocked on 5B, and found Claire with a book in one hand and a mug of coffee in the other. "Archie," she said, "did something happen?" "Cram's cleaning house," I said. "Pulled his gear from the basement. Probably realized we were closing in." She nodded slowly. "So what now?" "Now we keep him in sight. If he makes another move, Wolfe wants it documented. You see him, you call me. If he talks to anyone about what happened last night, let me know." Claire nodded. "Do you think he'll hurt anyone? If he does, it won't be with a knife or a gun. He works with fear, doubt. He's a specialist in creating cracks in the foundation." She gave me a look, equal parts gratitude and weariness, and I left her to her book. That night, I updated Wolfe. He listened, grunted, and took another sip of his beer. "Mr. Cram is not finished," he repeated. But he has grown cautious because he knows we're watching, because he has no other choice. His tools are psychological. He cannot risk exposure. But mark me, Archie, he will try to regain control. He may do so not by haunting, but by appealing. Appealing? Wolfe leaned back. He may attempt to recast himself as the victim. It is the final move of men like him. When threats fail, they seek sympathy. I grunted. You think he's going to turn the story around? Wolfe nodded. To whom do the weak tell their stories, Archie? That stumped me. He answered himself, to reporters. He was right. The next morning, at precisely 9:14 a.m., the phone rang. Fritz picked it up, then brought it to the office with the delicacy of a man handling nitroglycerin. For you, sir, he said. A Mr. Forbes, from the New York Chronicle. Wolfe raised an eyebrow, but took the receiver. Yes, he said flatly. A pause. I see. Another pause. No, I will not confirm that, because it is a fabrication. I heard the growing chill in his tone, which meant Cram had made his move. No, Mr. Cram is not my client, nor shall he be. And I suggest you retract whatever insinuation you are prepared to print. He hung up with a soft, precise click. Then looked at me. Mr. Cram has contacted the press. He claims he was the victim of a smear, that Miss Walcott harassed him with strange notes, that Miss Latham, out of misplaced sympathy, drew us into an amateur ghost hunt that culminated in false accusations. I whistled. Ballsy. Typical, Wolfe said. The manipulator must always rewrite the narrative when it slips from his control. So what's the counter move? Control the narrative ourselves. He reached into the drawer and pulled out a folder. Inside, photographs, notes, and Trina's notebook. You will deliver these to Inspector Kramer. You will explain, calmly and with precision, that this man is attempting to reverse engineer his defense. What about the reporter? I will speak with him again once we've secured the police's attention. If Kramer's credibility wavers, the press will follow. He closed the folder and pushed it toward me. Now, Archie, he said, go arrange justice. I stood, took the folder, and grinned. Yes, sir. But don't forget, sometimes even justice needs good lighting. Wolfe's lips curled. Just be sure it's not an echo. It was just past noon when I arrived at Inspector Kramer's office, with Wolfe's folder tucked under one arm and a statement already prepared in my head. I wasn't expecting a warm welcome. The last time I showed up with evidence, he called me a professional nuisance with a typewriter and too much charm. Today, he gave me the look you give a man who just rang your doorbell during lunch. This better not be another one of Wolfe's psychological crossword puzzles, he said, waving me in. I sat down and set the folder on his desk. I'm not here for your entertainment. I'm here because a man's trying to turn your crime scene into a sympathy campaign. Name's Dalton Cram. You'll be hearing more about him. Probably from himself. Kramer sighed and opened the folder, glancing through the photos and notes with a frown forming like a thundercloud on his forehead. These from the woman? The one in Bellevue? Trina Vellicott? Yes, Wolfe believes she was targeted, slowly, deliberately, and with enough precision to make her question her grip on reality. These are sketches from her notebook, accounts of hearing whispers, seeing shadows, all of which turned out to be staged by Mr. Cram. Kramer flipped a page. Bluetooth speaker. I nodded. Placed near a vent or possibly through the elevator shaft. He tailored his little haunting operation to her specific fears. Psychological sabotage. Wolfe called it murder by erosion. Kramer rubbed his jaw. Why? We think she painted something. A reflection. A partial image of Cram, caught on canvas before she consciously recognized him. It rattled him. He decided to get rid of her before she got too close. Sounds like motive, he muttered, but nothing we can charge. Yet, I said. But you might want to send a team over to the Marwick, check the basement. Wolfe thinks he retrieved his gear, but he might have missed something. Kramer shut the folder and gave me the look he saves for things that don't involve bullets or blood, but still make his job harder. All right, he said. I'll have a plainclothes officer watch him. If he slips, we catch him. I stood, tipped an imaginary hat, and left before he could change his mind. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the plant rooms, and unavailable. His daily ritual of sulking among orchids like a Roman emperor among perfumed courtiers. I waited in the office and caught up on filing, which meant I moved papers from one pile to another and pretended to look busy until he returned. When he finally descended, he settled into his chair with the kind of precision usually reserved for heart surgery. I briefed him. "Kramer's in," I said. "He'll keep a man on Cram." Wolfe grunted. "It is not enough. He won't arrest someone for being manipulative." "He should," Wolfe muttered. "It's a more dangerous weapon than a pistol." We were interrupted by the phone. I picked it up. "Goodwin," I said. The voice on the other end was Claire's. Her tone was sharp with tension. "Archie, I just spoke to Trina." I sat up straighter. "She called you. She said she remembered something new. Something she couldn't quite make sense of." "What was it?" "She said she remembered hearing music." "Music?" "Yes. Faint, classical. But not coming from her apartment, from somewhere below. Like someone playing it through a speaker." I looked at Wolfe. He had his eyes closed, but he was listening. "She thinks it happened more than once," Claire continued. "The night before she saw the figure in the mirror." I thanked her and hung up. Wolfe opened his eyes. "Well, she remembered music. Classical, coming from the shaft. That tracks with a speaker being used before the whispers, softening her up." He nodded. "We were correct. It began as a subtle invasion of routine, a slight disturbance to the familiar. Like background music that isn't yours." "Yes." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "It was not the content. It was the presence. An anomaly. Just enough to seed doubt. She's recovering faster than we thought. She may be more resilient than Mr. Cram calculated." That evening, the next move arrived. At 6:12 p.m., a manila envelope was delivered by hand to the brownstone. No return address. Fritz brought it in, gave me a look like it smelled funny, and left me to open it. Inside were two things: a printed statement from Dalton Cram and a photograph. The statement was a masterpiece of oily self-defense. He claimed he had been targeted by a group of well-meaning but emotionally unstable tenants who had confused coincidence with conspiracy. He suggested Trina Vellicott's art was not prophetic, but manipulative, and that Claire Latham had a troubled fascination with imagined phenomena. It was all wrapped up in a bow of victimhood, stating he would be seeking legal counsel and considering action against Wolfe for defamation. I handed the photo to Wolfe. He studied it with a frown. It showed the basement hallway of the Marwick, the service door slightly ajar, and just inside, behind a shelf, a shadowed figure, too blurry to make out clearly, but the sleeve, the posture, the angle of the arm, strongly suggested a man reaching for something. "A warning," Wolfe said. "Or a threat," I said. "He is attempting to document his own innocence preemptively. This is his insurance, and we're supposed to believe someone else took this photo. Indeed, an anonymous witness." Wolfe sneered. "He is positioning himself as the observed, rather than the observer. That is always the final trick. What do? We let him believe he is succeeding. Then we make him fall into his own story." I nodded. "So we bait him." "Yes," Wolfe said, "but delicately. Miss Latham will assist. Invite her tomorrow." "Under what pretext?" Wolfe leaned back. "Tell her the painting must be returned." I raised an eyebrow. "That'll get her here. What do you plan to do?" He closed his eyes. Catch an echo in the act. The trap was set. Tomorrow, Cram would make another move. He had to, because men like him couldn't stop. They needed the last word, the last whisper. But this time, the shaft would be listening back. Claire Latham arrived the next morning in a storm-colored coat, a look of suspicion, and carrying a canvas bag. Wolfe hadn't actually requested. She stepped into the office like someone aware she was about to be asked to lie for a good cause, and trying to decide if it was worth the wait. Wolfe barely moved when she entered. He motioned her to the red chair and gestured toward the bag. "You brought it?" "Yes," she said, setting it down. "The painting. But I don't believe you asked me here just for that." "You're correct," Wolfe said without apology. "I require your assistance in the final phase of our engagement with Mr. Cram." "Final phase?" "You will invite him to meet you at the Marwick this evening. 8 o'clock. You will say you've reconsidered." Claire narrowed her eyes. "Reconsidered what?" "You've decided he may have been right all along. That Trina's condition was unstable, that the painting was misinterpreted, that you regret speaking to Wolfe and me." She leaned back, crossing her arms. "You want me to convince him I've changed sides?" "Yes." "Why would he believe me?" "Because he wants to," Wolfe said. "He needs an ally now. He has spun his story too wide. If he believes you are retracting your support for Miss Vellicott, he will welcome it, perhaps even confide in you." Claire said nothing for a moment. Then, "And what if he sees through it?" "He won't," Wolfe said. "You are intelligent, poised, and have spoken to him as a peer. He thinks he can reason with you. That makes you the most dangerous person in his world." She gave me a quick glance. I nodded. "You won't be alone. I'll be there. Saul Panzer, too, watching. Wolfe's got it mapped out already." Claire frowned. "You've already placed people in the building, haven't you?" "Yesterday morning," I said. "A tenant on the second floor doesn't really exist, but Saul Panzer does." Wolfe interrupted. "You need only speak to him. Be vulnerable, doubtful. Suggest he was right, that perhaps Trina invented the voice. He will try to clarify the record. And then, you leave," Wolfe said simply. "Come directly here. I do not want you remaining longer than 10 minutes. Claire exhaled. "This is dangerous." "Yes," Wolfe said. "But justice is never sterile." She stared at him. "You're sure he'll take the bait?" "I'm sure he won't be able to resist." By 7:30 that evening, I was in place. I took up a spot in the building's mail alcove, coat collar up, hat low, pretending to read an out-of-date issue of the New Yorker while occasionally checking the mirrored panel on the opposite wall. Saul was 1 floor up, in 2A, with a camera rigged discreetly to catch the hallway by the service stairwell. Claire entered just before 8. She didn't look back, didn't acknowledge me. She moved with the brisk confidence of someone returning a library book, not attempting to draw a confessed gaslighter out into the open. At 8A3, Dalton Cram arrived. He wore a navy coat, no tie, and a grin that would have looked better on a hyena. He leaned in when Claire opened the door to 5B and stepped inside without hesitation. I checked my watch, started counting. 9 minutes later, Claire emerged. Alone. Face unreadable. I met her just outside the elevator. "He's still in there," she said quietly. "He thinks I'm calling Wolfe now, to apologize." "Did he say anything?" "He said he was sorry he got involved, that he thought Trina was dangerous to herself and didn't want to provoke her. He said he only wanted to help her understand her own fears." She looked at me. He admitted to placing the speaker. He called it a behavioral experiment. I winced. "Textbook sociopath, or a failed philosopher," she said. I nodded toward the stairs. "Go. Wolfe's waiting. Saul and I will handle the rest." She left. I buzzed Saul through the signal line we'd installed in the fake apartment. He met me in the second-floor stairwell with the grace of a man who could vanish into his own coat, if needed. "He said it?" Saul asked. All but drew a diagram. Claire says he admitted to the speaker, claimed it was for her own good, trying to correct a misinterpretation of fear. "Sound like anyone you know. Sounds like a guy who should be paying me by the hour." We waited. At 8:19, Cram exited the apartment. He wasn't smiling now. He looked tense, like someone walking out of a poker game unsure if he'd just won or lost. He turned left, not toward the elevator, but toward the service stairwell. Bingo. I nudged Saul. "Now." We followed him silently. He opened the service door, glanced behind him, and descended. We crept down behind, not close but enough to track his movement. Cram reached the basement, slipped past the utility shelves, and crouched behind the old boiler housing. That's when we saw it. The bat. Not the one Rafe had mentioned. Another one. Smaller, black, tucked behind a panel. Saul raised the camera and clicked. Flashless. Quiet. Professional. Cram opened the bag and pulled out something metallic. I leaned closer. It was a directional speaker. Small, sleek, and equipped with a battery pack. State of the art. He cradled it in one hand and looked up. That's when he saw us. He froze. We didn't. Evening, I said. Heard there was a ghost down here. Cram's mouth twitched. You can't prove I used it. We can prove you hit it, Saul said. Which is obstruction. And we can link it to audio recordings, I added. Trina's recording, Claire's, yours, if I had to guess. He didn't say a word, just lowered the device and sat down on the crate behind him. I just wanted her out, he muttered. She kept staring. Like she knew. Like she'd seen something I hadn't done yet. I said nothing. There was nothing to say. We called Kramer. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe waited with the patience of a man who already knew the outcome. Claire sat quietly near the bookshelf, watching him with a mixture of awe and revulsion. Fritz brought coffee. Wolfe didn't touch it. When I walked in, Saul behind me, Wolfe raised a brow. He went for it, I said. We followed him to the boiler room, found a second device. He was retrieving it when we confronted him, claimed he just wanted to help Trina understand herself. Wolfe's lip curled. Men like that believe harm is education. Kramer sent a car. They'll hold him. Maybe not forever, but long enough. Claire stood. He'll tell people it was just a misunderstanding, that he was trying to help her. Yes, Wolfe said. And they may believe him. For a while. But his record now includes patterns. And the women he tried to unmake are no longer silent. She stepped closer. Thank you, Mr. Wolfe. Thank you, Mr. Wolfe. I dislike gratitude, he said. But I approve of resolve. You have mine. She left soon after. Wolfe finally lifted his coffee. There is a deeper cruelty, he said softly, in convincing someone they cannot trust their own mind. That is not mere mischief. It is possession by another name. I leaned back in my chair. So he didn't haunt the building. He haunted her. Yes, Wolfe said. And like all hauntings, it ends when light is introduced. He closed his eyes. And Mr. Goodwin, he added, please inform Mr. Panzer that I may require him again. Another case. No, Wolfe said, lifting his cup. But Fritz informs me our cellar echoes. And I prefer my silence untouched. I grinned. Amen to that. The next morning the brownstone was quiet, eerily so. The kind of quiet that made even the radiator think twice before clanking. Wolfe was in his chair, motionless, not even pretending to read. He'd finished with the orchids early, claimed the humidity was wrong for concentration, and had descended in a darker mood than usual. I knew what it was. The case had technically been closed, but it hadn't been concluded. Wolfe hated ambiguity the way most people hate wasps in their shoes, and something was still gnawing at him, something not yet fully laid bare. I let him stew until 10. At exactly 10:01, I poured a second cup of coffee and walked into the office. All right, I said. We've got the creep in custody, the hardware's been seized, and the building's ghost-free. So why do you still look like you've swallowed a bad paragraph from Freud? Wolfe didn't open his eyes, because Mr. Cram's motivations remain insufficient. I raised an eyebrow. Insufficient? He wanted her out. She saw something, painted something. He panicked. No, Wolfe said. He planned. And yet for all his planning he acted with increasing urgency. He escalated quickly, too quickly. The whispers, the music, the midnight shadows. It is not the rhythm of a man content merely to nudge. I took a seat. You think there's more? I think, Wolfe said slowly, there's a second layer, a secondary fear. Not of being recognized, but of being exposed in a broader sense. I leaned back. You think Trina didn't just see him. She saw something about him. Wolfe opened his eyes. Precisely. I sat with that. And the longer I did, the more it made sense. Cram had overreacted. Not in a heat-of-the-moment way, but methodically, with steps and strategy. He hadn't just wanted Trina frightened. He wanted her removed, not simply silenced, but erased. So what are you thinking? I asked. Blackmail. Some secret she stumbled onto. No, Wolfe said. Not blackmail. He wasn't paying her to be quiet. He was dismantling her confidence before she could speak. It was preemptive destruction. That's different. There was a knock at the door. Fritz entered, bearing an envelope. Delivered just now, he said. No return address. I took it, opened it, and whistled softly. It was a sketch, pencil, quick but skilled. The same hallway from Trina's painting, but from a different angle. And in this one, the figure in the elevator mirror was clearer. You could see part of the face. I turned it toward Wolfe. She sent this, I asked. Miss Velicott, Wolfe asked, already certain. There's no note, but it's her hand. I've seen her sketches. This one's fresh, probably drawn at Bellevue. Wolfe studied it. She's remembering more. That frightens him. I nodded, because now she's not just the witness. She's the narrator. And he can't control what she remembers. Wolfe drummed his fingers. We must speak with her. Today. Arrange it. Bellevue won't like it. Then go through the detective assigned. Kramer will know whom to call. I picked up the phone. 20 minutes later we had a 2:00 p.m. appointment at Bellevue. By 1:15, I was on the subway, dodging elbows and counting stops. Trina Velicott met me in the courtyard again. She looked better. Still thin, still pale, but her eyes were clearer. Less like a storm cloud, and more like someone waiting for the sun. I remembered the sleeve, she said before I could speak. That's why I drew it again. The sleeve was wrong. It wasn't just a suit. It had a pin. A pin. She nodded. A lapel pin. I couldn't place it at first, but I think it was a company logo. A stylized C. I blinked. You mean, like a financial firm? Yes, a boutique one. I saw it once in an article he showed me, back when he was pretending to be friendly. He said he was part of a hedge fund called Clarion. That set bells off. Wolfe had me cross-check Cram's background, but Clarion hadn't come up. Then again, if you're trying to look legitimate, you can buy a blazer and a nameplate. The real question was whether Clarion existed or if it was just another mask. Did he ever mention clients? I asked. No, but he used to carry a leather folio. He was very protective of it. Ever see what was inside? She shook her head. No. But once he dropped it near the elevator. Papers spilled. I saw some kind of chart. Names. Not numbers. Names? Yes. One of them was circled. Mine. That changed everything. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened without interrupting. When I finished, he opened the top drawer of his desk and pulled out a manila folder, one I hadn't seen before. Last night, he said, I asked Saul to dig. He slid the folder across. Inside were copies of real estate records, corporate filings, and a single redacted document from a private investigator Wolfe had used before. Cram had worked with a data analytics firm 4 years ago. Small, obscure, and later absorbed into a larger predictive behavior outfit. He was profiling people, I said. Yes, Wolfe said. Likely still is. Quietly. Illegally. You saw the chart. He identified her as what, high risk? Or test subject. I closed the folder. He wasn't just trying to scare her. He was testing how far she could be pushed. Yes, Wolfe said. And the speaker was not the first attempt. I stood. We need to tell Kramer. No, Wolfe said. We wait. Wait. Yes. For him to panic. I frowned. He already has. Wolfe shook his head. No. What he did before was planning. The panic comes next. It came that night. At 9:42 p.m., Claire called. "He's been here," she said, breathless. "He showed up at the building." "Did he talk to you?" "No. He wasn't looking for me. He tried to get into Trina's apartment." I froze. "You're sure?" "Yes." "He had gloves, and he looked different. Not nervous, determined, like he wanted something specific." "What stopped him?" "Lipsy," she said. "He opened his door, asked what Cram was doing. Cram left immediately. That was it. That was the move Wolfe had predicted." I called Kramer. 10 minutes later, a cruiser was en route to the Marwick. Wolfe was already sipping beer by the time I returned to the office. "He went back," I said. "Tried to get into Trina's place." "Of course," Wolfe said. "He's not afraid of being accused. He's afraid she left evidence. Notes, names, charts. She might have. She did. And now, with a legal search underway, we'll find it." I sat, stretched. "You know," I said, "if he hadn't tried so hard to discredit her, we might never have believed her." "Indeed," Wolfe said. "Cruelty always reveals itself when it reaches for control." He set down his glass. "Tomorrow, we will close the matter fully." I leaned back. "And after that?" "After that," Wolfe said, "we return to silence." But we both knew some echoes never really leave. At precisely 11:30 the next morning, the Brownstones' doorbell rang. Fritz answered, exchanged a few words in his careful, disapproving German-inflected English, and then ushered Inspector Kramer into the office without fanfare. Wolfe was already seated, a light blue handkerchief tucked under his chin, a breakfast of soft-boiled eggs and toast crumbs swept away. He nodded as Kramer entered, but didn't rise. Naturally, Kramer closed the door behind him and dropped a file folder onto Wolfe's desk, like it had weight. Emotional or legal, hard to tell with Kramer. "We found it," he said flatly. I leaned forward. "Found what?" "Vellicott's apartment had a false panel behind a cabinet. Took a little knocking around, but we got it open. Inside were notes. Dozens. Observations, charts, name fragments, and a list." "A list?" Wolfe asked. Kramer opened the file. 26 names. Most of them are women. Some matched to building addresses. Others were blank. Just notes on behavior, triggers, emotional states. It reads like a study, but it's handwritten. All in Cram's hand. Wolfe reached out, took the paper and skimmed. He stopped on page 3 and grunted. "Clarion," he said. "Yep," Kramer said. "Turns out it was never a proper firm. Kramer operated it as a front for something more personal: behavioral analytics, profiling. He posed as a consultant. Most of it's harmless on paper, but once you factor in the tech, the devices, the whispers, suddenly we've got conspiracy to endanger, criminal trespass, and possibly unlawful surveillance." He looked at me. "He tried to burn it all last night. Got into her apartment again. Would have succeeded if Lipsy hadn't spotted him." Wolfe nodded. "A mistake. Desperation always betrays intelligence." Kramer sat. "We're holding him. But I thought you'd want to see this before the DA does. He won't get 10 years, but he'll get something. And with luck, this'll stop him from trying again, under a different name." Wolfe held up the paper, then set it down carefully. "His goal," Wolfe said, "was never merely to frighten Miss Vellicott. It was to test her, to see how far she could be pushed without touching her, without a mark. But every mind has its tipping point. She saw him, she painted him, and that was enough to make her the target." He folded his hands on his considerable abdomen. "And we were nearly too late." Kramer stood, tugging his jacket straight. "You weren't. Neither was she." He looked at me. "You did good work, Goodwin. But next time, tell me before someone nearly jumps out a window." "I did tell you," I said. "You just didn't believe me." Kramer grunted and walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Wolfe remained silent. I let it sit. Finally, he spoke. "It is done." I nodded. "Almost." He looked at me. I called Claire. I said, "She's at Bellevue now. Trina's being released this afternoon. Doctor says she's stronger. Not just stable, resilient. She's going to stay with Claire for a while." Wolfe allowed himself a slow nod. "Good. Wants her to start painting again. Said she needs to reframe what happened." "An excellent prescription," Wolfe said. "Turning observation into art is the only defense against madness." Fritz entered with beer. Wolfe took it, sipped. The glass clicked softly against the desk. "I must admit," Wolfe said, "I had not anticipated the depth of Mr. Cram's pathology. His need for control was not rooted in malice, but in obsession. Worse, in curiosity." "Worse." "Yes," Wolfe said. "Malice has boundaries. Curiosity does not." I stood and stretched. The office was quiet again. No suspects, no recordings, no echo. "You know," I said, "when she showed us that first painting, I thought it was a little dramatic. Now I think it was the most honest part of the whole case." Wolfe closed his eyes. Miss Fellicott saw what others dismissed. That is often the burden of the imaginative. They perceive before proof exists. It is why people like Mr. Cram choose them. To silence them. To use them, Wolfe said. As canvases, as mirrors, as experiments. I walked to the window, looked out at 35th Street. The trees were moving. The world was the same, but it wasn't. Not for Trina, not for Claire. Maybe not for me. "She'll be okay," I said. "Yes," Wolfe said. "Because she survived knowing. That is rare." He finished his beer and set the glass down. "Dinner will be served in 40 minutes, he said. "Fritz is preparing pheasant. You're telling me this because I expect you to be on time, and because I do not intend to discuss Mr. Cram again." I smiled. "Case closed?" Wolfe opened his eyes. "No, case complete." That was Wolfe for you. Justice wasn't always a sentence. Sometimes it was a silence, earned, settled, and uninterrupted. I left the office and went to tell Fritz I'd be on time. Behind me, Wolfe returned to his chair. The brownstone was quiet again. The echoes had stopped, but I had a feeling Wolfe would remember them. He always did. Somewhere in the corner of the office, the painting still sat, Trina's first, the one with the elevator mirror, and in it, the figure was still reaching, but no longer unseen. The following morning was unseasonably warm for October, the kind of morning that makes you think maybe autumn decided to give the city a rain check. I was in the front room going over some old invoices that refused to add up the way they were supposed to when the front door buzzed. Fritz answered. Moments later, Claire Latham entered the office alone. No coat, no canvas bag, just calm, contained satisfaction on her face. Wolfe looked up from Plutarch's Lives, set the book aside and gave her a courteous nod. "Miss Latham," he said, "you have news." "I do," she said. "Trina's out. She and I had breakfast together this morning. Real breakfast." She laughed at something twice. "She's not fine. Not yet. But she's there. She's present." Wolfe nodded once. "Good. That will do." Claire remained standing, watching him. "You know," she said slowly, "I've been thinking about what you said. That Cram's cruelty came from curiosity, from his need to know how far someone could be pushed." Wolfe said nothing. I realized something. He didn't just want to remove Trina. He wanted her to fail on her own, so he could pretend he wasn't responsible. Wolfe inclined his head. "A neat trick. Most damage is delivered that way. Clean hands, dirty conscience." Claire glanced at me. And yet, when he realized she might survive it, when she began to see what he'd done, he lost control. I added, "The predator couldn't survive being perceived. That's what did him in." Wolfe sighed, deep, almost regal. "Yes. There is nothing so dangerous to a manipulator as a victim who remembers." Claire sat at last. "She's painting again. Not buildings this time. Not hallways. People." "Ah," Wolfe murmured. "Reclamation." We sat in silence a while. The good kind. The rare kind. Then Claire stood. I just wanted to thank you, she said. Both of you. I dislike thanks, Wolfe said. But I approve of closure. She smiled, turned, and left. After she was gone, Wolfe shifted in his chair, eyes closed. You know, I said, for someone who never left his chair, you chased a ghost down an elevator shaft and came out ahead. Wolfe didn't open his eyes. There was no ghost, Archie. Merely a man hiding in the acoustics of others' pain. I whistled. That's almost poetic. I detest poetry, Wolfe said. But even I will admit, sometimes the truth must be whispered before it can be spoken. He fell silent. I picked up the day's mail and sorted it without reading any of it. Outside, the city hummed. Inside, the brownstone was quiet. Undisturbed. No echoes, no false alarms. The case was over, not just solved, but understood, which in Wolfe's world was rarer and more valuable than confession. Dinner was lamb. Fritz served it with rosemary, and a faint smirk that suggested Wolfe had been in a mood all day. I ate my portion, resisted a second helping, and poured a glass of Wolfe's favorite beer without asking. He didn't thank me. He didn't have to. That night, as I climbed the stairs, I paused by the office one last time. The painting still hung near the bookshelf, Trina's first. The mirror in the elevator still showed a man, reaching, but now, he had no face left to hide behind. And that, as Wolfe would say, was the point.